of number theory, s- representation theory of Lie groups, spectral theory of differential operators on locally symmetric spaces. He has completed his Masters of Mathematics from Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore, and went on to do graduate PhD in mathematics from Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Mumbai. He has been invited for talks and academic visits in India as well as outside India too. It's an honor to have you with us today, sir. Yep. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Shall we begin the talk? You are ready with the YouTube uh, thing and all? Okay, so I guess I should begin. So let me know if there is some
Yeah, we
issue
can
with the
start.
audio or video. Okay, very good. So let me start by thanking the Science Club for organizing this amazing series of talks on symmetry. And I'm sure you enjoyed the previous talks on given on this theme by my colleagues. I believe there are some 5 to 6 talks in all. Before beginning my talk, let me correct one small part from the student who introduced me just now. So it's not about me, but one of the research areas she mentioned was Lie groups. That's a common misunderstanding in the people within the people who don't know those groups. So you will see something more about these special groups in my talk today. But the main thing I wanted to correct is that Lie is the name of a mathematician. Pronunciation is Lee. So Sophus Lee was a mathematician who contributed to this subject of symmetry and group theory in broader aspect. And some special kind of symmetric groups which are called Lie groups, named after Lee. So they're actually true. So one should not call them Lie groups. That's the small correction I would like to start with. I don't know whether everything was recorded, so this was part of the introduction of mine, which was given in the beginning. Anyway, let me start with the talk. So the theme is symmetry, and I will like to talk about symmetry and invariance in the field of mathematics. And of course, it's a short introductory talk in some sense, accessible to laypersons as well as students and scientists alike. So I'd like to only give a broad view. So that's why the title says bird's eye view. There's a lot to read, lot to learn, lot to work on open problems in this area. So let's explore. So I'm just sharing my iPad on the screen. So as I scroll, I hope you will also see the scrolled screen. If there's an issue, I request the organizers to let me know in the chat so that I'll correct it. In case anybody has a pressing question, you can stop me and ask, but I will prefer to have the question answers towards the end where I will indicate when to have it. So I hope it's readable. So I'll very broadly keep the things into perspective. What exactly I mean by symmetry in mathematics and what I'm going to talk about. Since this word is very commonly used, there are many interpretations. I'm sure in other talks you will hear more about those interpretations as well. In mathematics, we are going to focus on a certain notion of symmetry, which I described in simple words here. So there will be some space. So we'll very soon see examples. So this is little abstract at this moment. As soon as you see some examples, the ideas will be clearer. So there will be a certain set. Yeah. So by space, I mean that. And then there will be certain structure. So for example, we'll look at some geometric shapes, some geometric objects. What is geometric set will be also clear in the context from the examples. But to start with, I'm also going to talk about some very simple notions or some finite sets without anything to worry about. This is just some abstract set of symbols which have some relation between them, but nothing geometric about it. And it can be thought of as a special case of certain geometries. That's the idea. And then the context in which I'm going to talk about, I'm more or less going to focus on this idea that a set with some extra properties which are related to the geometry. And then what will be a symmetry for me? So I'm assuming that people know very basic ideas like functions, injective maps, bijective maps, and so on. So what's a symmetry for us? It's going to be some transformation on this space, which is mathematically a bijective map. So what is bijective? So every point goes to some other point in the same space, and no two points go to same point, and every point is let's say replaced by some point. So no point vanishes. So that sort of thing is called bijection. Yeah. So this is the simplest description I can give at this moment. And of course, one can look at all bijections, and that will be often a huge set of symmetries, and then it will be difficult to deal with it algebraically. So then comes the next notion of what is invariance, which is also part of my title. So these things go hand in hand, at least for this talk. So what we are going to do is we are going to look at certain kinds of bijections which preserve a given set of properties. So again, I will talk about some examples from geometry, something called a real analysis, something called algebra, and maybe a little bit of something called differential geometry. And then you will see various examples of the symmetries and invariance. And just to start with, so I'll talk about what is this doing in next slide. But all of you know the notion of length and angles that we see in our usual school geometry. So in mathematics, one can make it more abstract and talk about more different kind of spaces which are not so-called Euclidean, which we learn in school. But there is a notion of length, there is a notion of angles, and so for example, geometric properties could mean this, and we'll look at symmetries which preserve such geometric properties. So this is the perspective in which I'm going to give this talk. So just to bring everyone in same place, we are going to look at bijections which preserve certain in properties which we are going to call invariance. So this preservation of properties called invariance, and the properties themselves which are or the structure which is getting preserved will be called invariants. So let's start with the very basic object that all of us are familiar with, namely a 12-hour clock. So this is the pre-digital clock, so nobody uses it, at least not the generation of students which are right now in most majority in the audience. You guys rarely use such clocks, but maybe my generation and the generation before me were more used to it. So this clock has 12 symbols. Conventionally, one starts with 1, not 0, and goes all up to 12. Again, 1, 12, like that. So suppose I want to talk about symmetries of this clock. Now there are some obvious things which I want to keep intact. For example, the disk on which these numbers are drawn, I'm going to keep them as it is. Nothing changes there. What is allowed to change is the placing of, for example, numbers. So think of these as 12 boxes, and you're putting 12 symbol here, one symbol here, and so on. Suppose I'm allowed to move them around in any way. Okay, what does that mean? I'm in mathematical terms, I'll not write these things because they are not so relevant. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to define a function on the set of 12 symbols, 1 to 12, which is a bijective function. In layman's term, this is just a rearrangement of these 12 numbers or a permutation of these 12 numbers. And suppose I'm allowed to do any kind of permutation. Then, as I written in the next slide, you can see that there are 12 factorial such arrangements, and that's a huge number. Those who haven't seen how big is this 12 factorial, please calculate it and convince yourself that practically it will be difficult to study them one by one and handle. Okay, so again, this is a very subjective term. What is too big, what is to handle, I'm not going to define, but some intuition we have is that this is a huge number, and comparatively to compare, let's say, if I compare this with what I'm going to say next, it's huge. So let's see whether we can change this. So now I'm going to put a condition. So let me just go back to the previous two slides. So what a clock is going to do. So if it is 12 o'clock, the hand is here. In 1 hour, it will move to 1, and then it should go to 1. So if I want to keep the speed of moving of the hand constant, then whatever way I arrange these 12 numbers, 1 is better near 12. Okay, so this is called the adjacency relation. So let me just go to this again and let me just abstractly describe what is this. So I want consecutive integers to remain adjacent to each other. That is 5 and 6 should be adjacent. Nothing should come in between them. 6 and 7 should be also adjacent and so on. They can be in different order. 7 could come before 6. I'm allowed to move the hand in a different orientation, but the speed should remain constant. And of course, 12 and 1 should be adjacent so that after 12, or yeah, meaning the hand should move from 12 to 1 in 1 minute of time, whatever 1 hour means. And that's why they should be adjacent. So this is something like an invariant condition. Okay. So they could move anywhere except they should satisfy such a condition. Yeah. So I'm putting more conditions, more restrictions on the symmetries now. And now it's a small exercise in basic permutation combination, which I can easily describe here. So suppose I want to, so let me use a different ink and draw something. Suppose I want to rearrange them with this adjacency condition prism. So let me start with putting 12. So suppose I want to put 12 here. Okay. I claim that now I only have two choices. I have to put one either here or here. Suppose I put here and not here. Then everything is fixed. 10 has to come here, 9 has to come here, and so on, and then 1 will come here. Okay, so I made only two choices. I decided where to put 12, and then after putting 12, I chose where to put 1, and that determined everything else. Going back to the slide, I just did this calculation and explained what I told by the diagram just now, that there will be 24 such symmetries. And a small exercise for you is that geometrically, what I've done is that each of these symmetries is exactly a rotation of the original clock in certain angle, what orientation you can think about. And then there will be 12 reflections. So reflection will mean that, again, I'll use the diagram. That's easy. So a reflection will mean this. So suppose I join 1 and 7. Since my drawing was not very perfect, this may not pass through the center of the circle, but assume that it is actually passing through the center. Then there is a line like this, and then you reflect along this line. So let me just draw what happens. So 9 goes to, so suppose I started with this arrangement. Let me remove this arrangement. Let me start with the original arrangement. Then I'm drawing the line between 1 and 7 here. And if I reflect everything along that line, then of course 1 and 7 will remain as it is. They are on that line. Think of this as a mirror. And then 12 will become 2, 2 will become 12. 11 will become 3, 3 will become 11, like that. So I'm looking at the red marked numbers, not the green ones. All right, so you understood what is a reflection. So you can go and check that this is where the geometry comes into picture, that all the symmetries we talked about are nothing but reflections and rotations, and there are 12 of them. So which 12 rotations and which 12 reflections, I'll leave it to you to check. It's a nice introductory exercise in symmetry and group theory. I'll talk about what is a group in a while. I'm coming towards that. I use the word group, but I haven't defined it. That's why. So the set of all these 24 symmetries is a coherent structure. In what sense, we'll see in a while. I'll just give an example of what is the coherence in this scenario. All these things, it's difficult to explain everything by drawing equations, writing equations and drawing figures here. So I'm just going to make some comments. You can go back and verify them. Suppose I take one rotation, one reflection. I operate them one by one. First I rotate, let's say in angle 30 degrees. So 1 goes to 2, 2 goes to 3 and so on. And then I reflect along the line which I've drawn in the picture sometime back. The combination of these two will be another reflection. And similarly, if I start with two rotations, the combination of two rotations will be another rotation. Similarly, if I start with two reflections, their combination will be a rotation. So all those things are easy to verify. You just do it by hand. So there is some coherence between them in the sense that you can compose one. So you can perform them one by one, which is called composition in mathematics. And the composition of two symmetries is another symmetry of the same type. What is the type? The one which keeps the consecutive integers adjacent to each other. So this is the idea of what is a group. So since this is not a let's say traditional course in mathematics where I have to define each and everything very carefully, I decided just to tell you what's happening here. I'll just show you one slide with the definition of all these objects called groups and so on, but that's not so important right now. You should just know by hand, by some example, what's happening. So this is the main feature, that composition of two symmetries is a symmetry. And there are some other properties which we'll come to later. Now a question. So suppose I want to put more restrictions. So far the only restriction was that the consecutive integers were supposed to be near each other. But now suppose I'm putting more restrictions, that which of these guys preserve the orientation? Now there's an obvious orientation in the clock. In fact, every other orientation in geometry is defined as clockwise or counterclockwise or anti-clockwise. That's other synonym for it. So clock is the basic object which it gives rise to orientation, and you know what is exactly clockwise and what is anti-clockwise. So going back to the figure, so in this figure, the original orientation, let's call it clockwise, like 1, 2, 3 in this direction. Suppose I have a so let me ask a slightly different question. So suppose I reflect along these lines, then at least intuitively it's clear to all of you that the orientation reverses, because 2 is going here, 3 is going here. So 2 and 3, the path will go in this direction, which is anti-clockwise. So the orientation of the clock disk is going to change if I apply the reflection. And the same, so the question applies to all these 24 symmetries, that which of them are going to preserve the orientation and which of them are going to reverse it. And once you figure it out, so this is exercise for you. And once you figure it out, you can also think about what will be the notion of orientation for all possible permutations. Is there a way to talk about orientation for that? Yeah, so that's a slightly different and difficult kind of question. So let me not go into that detail. Just think about it. Some other point of time we can talk about it. And then there is another just summarizing slide which will give you the following theme. So I'll just very quickly go through it, and because I don't want to be stuck on the clock for a long time. So the thing is that if only number of symbols and the set of symbols is fixed, they can nothing else needs to be fixed. Then there were 12 factorial different symmetries. Whereas if you put the condition of adjacency being fixed, there are only 24. Okay. Then I'm not writing anything here, but you can guess what will come here. So rotations are only 12 of them, and they also satisfy a certain invariance property, which was part of the question earlier. So let me not say anything there, but it's some more condition. And if you look at nothing, you just look at the original position itself as a symmetry, which is basically nothing is happening. One stays as it is, two stays as it is, and so on. Then everything stays. All the properties of your original clock disk were there, they stay. So there is a symmetry which is not going to change anything. That's called identity symmetry. So what's the moral of the story is that as long as you start putting more restrictions here, more restriction here, and more restriction here, your set of symmetries goes on getting smaller and smaller. The number started from 12 factorial, reduces to 24, reduces to 12, then reduces to 1. So this is the theme, that more and more conditions of invariance you go on putting, you'll get smaller and smaller set of symmetries. I use the word group again. So let me remind you that I told you what is a group. You can compose, and then there are more conditions which you can read about later. Okay, so this is the theme which I just now said. And then one small comment which is not so relevant. I'll just make one line remark about it and go ahead. So in general, there could be more symmetries which don't do anything. So you'll see examples of that later, not immediately. So you look at the set of symmetries which fix everything. All the points in the space go to themselves. Such symmetries have a name. They're called, so the mathematically it's called kernel of a certain homomorphism. And it's basically the set which is not, let's say, acting trivially or not making any changes to the space that you have started with. And there's a word called faithful symmetry group. So the faithfulness means that only one element is there which doesn't change anything, which is what happened in the clock situation. Every other element can keep something invariant. Okay, so that's why it is called factful group of symmetries. But this is not so important notion in today's talk, so let me not go into details. Okay, so I kept some slides in between in case somebody in the end asks me something and need to write something. So you'll see some blank slides in between. That's not a typographic error. I defined group here and I'll not go into the definition here. You can read it along the way. But more importantly, what we are going to see is how, let's say, so by group, you will only mean a set of symmetries with some properties, which let's not go into detail with. But a certain set, coherent set of symmetries is there. And then it's somehow going to transform your space in a different way. So this is the mathematical meaning of this, that you have a space and every point of the space moves to some other point. So that means there is a function from x to x via this symmetry. Okay, so the rotation will move, rotation of let's say size 4 in the clockwise direction will move 1 to 5, 2 to 6 and so on. So that will be the example of what is group action. Very soon I'm going to draw a picture and show you some geometry, then things will be clear, the actual movement of elements. Okay, so again, let me not go into equations here. We'll come back to this if needed. Let me directly go to the next example from spherical geometry, where I'm going to start with this unit sphere in R3. So this is the equator of the sphere. There are two poles, but I'm not drawn them in this picture. So this is the usual sphere. So it's called S2 for some reason. It's a surface. It's a two-dimensional object. So but let's not go into that right now. Let's just think of this as the usual sphere. One clarification is that I'm just going to look at the, let's say, outer part of the sphere, not the solid sphere. Okay, so it's like hollow. We are only going to look at the surface of the sphere. That's called the sphere in mathematics. And then we are going to look at certain symmetries of this. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to give examples of symmetries by via these two pictures, and then I just tell you a fact that all symmetries satisfying a certain invariance condition are something something without giving any proof, because again this is not a proof based lecture. This is just to give you an idea of what are symmetries. So what happens for a sphere? So suppose I'll just briefly tell you what needs to be preserved. So of course the shape of the sphere should not change. We want even after doing some symmetry, doing some transformation, the sphere should remain sphere. And the in particular more properties should be true. For example, there is a notion of distance on spheres. I'll just draw some points and very briefly explain to you what is distance on sphere. So you look at, let's say, any 2 points on sphere, then of course the straight line joining them is not going to be on the sphere. Okay, it's going to be inside the sphere, and that's not going to be that's not going to be the correct definition of distance, because one can't go to from this point to this point via this line remaining on the sphere. So now what I want to do instead of this, I want you to think what is the shortest way to go from one point to other. Let me call them A and B, or A1 and A2. And then there's a notion of geodesic, which all of you must have heard about. So for example, this is the kind of path of aeroplane will follow when you want to go from, let's say, India to US, which is like almost a 12-hour difference on the time scale. So you look at the shortest path joining, let's say, Pune and New York, and then it won't be like this. New York will be somewhere here if Pune is here. But whatever, any 2 points on the earth, you can join them by the shortest path and then calculate the length of that path. That's the notion of distance on a sphere. And it will be often something called arc of a great circle, which which I'll talk about in a while. What is a great circle and so on. So this is the notion of distance. And then you can talk about angles. So let me draw one more distance. So suppose from here you are turning in some angle and going to A3. Then there is a way to talk about what is this angle. You have to just draw tangents on the sphere to those two parts and then calculate the angle between them. And this is the notion of angle. So the symmetries in this context will be all those transformations of sphere which preserve the sphere itself, they preserve the lengths, they preserve the angles and other geometric entities. And then let me just draw, I've drawn the two pictures and let me just describe two symmetries. You can hopefully visualize and convince yourself that it satisfies all these properties. One is that you fix one axis. So you fix one vertical line passing through the center of the sphere. And then you look at something called great circle, which is like an equator. So which should be perpendicular to this axis. Okay, now it doesn't have to be, it can be any latitude. It doesn't have to be great circle, but for convenience, I've drawn it as a great circle. And then what you do is that you rotate every point on the sphere in this direction with some angle. Okay, so one can write down those angles in terms of the angle made by this line and uh, let's say some other lines and so on. But let me not go into that. You just think of this, think of a ball, think of a straight line, and then you rotate the ball around that line. So that line doesn't change. Everything rotates by a certain angle. This kind of thing will be a symmetry. So these are called rotations in 3D. And there is a certain matrix group associated with it, which I'll come to in a short while. And the other kind of thing is reflection, where you look at some great circle like I did here, and then you look at this is the great circle, this is like an equator. You look at the equatorial plane, which contains that great circle, and you reflect everything along that plane. That will be the other symmetry. Okay, so this is what the spherical symmetries are going to look like. Okay, so I described quite a lot in detail here. So to respect the time given to me, let me go a little fast here. We can come back to this in Q&A session. So the two facts, all symmetries are going to look like this, either a rotation or a reflection. And the group of all such symmetries is called the O3 orthogonal group of 3 by 3 matrices. So you look at all matrices which satisfy such a condition. So you look at a matrix, look at its transpose, and you demand that the product is identity. So A is 3 by 3, and you know what is a transpose. The ijth element becomes jith element. So this is you look at all matrices which satisfy this condition, and the matrices which are determinant 1 in this group will be the rotations in R3 around the origin, and there will be an axis also, and the remaining elements will be reflections. Okay, so let me just leave it here, not go into how these are characterized and so on. Again, there is the notion of orientation, preserving symmetries and orientation, reversing symmetries. One can go into that. And then the comment which I just made here tells you that which of them are preserving orientation and which of them are reversing. And before moving to the next topic in this, let me ask you two questions, which I'll not answer. You guys can just think about it. This is a purely thought process question. You just imagine a sphere in front of you, and then you know what are symmetries. They're either rotations or reflections of certain types. Question is, given let's say two arbitrary points on sphere, you choose arbitrary points that you like and ask whether there is a rotation or reflection taking one to other. And the second question is that can you always choose it to be rotation so that the orientation is preserved? That is one question. And the other question is also important. So I'm just giving you the theme of symmetries. One theme is that, is there a symmetry taking a given point to another given point? That's the first general question. And the second point is that what are the points of the symmetries which are fixed? So I'll give an example. Suppose you are rotating around one vertical axis like this, then any 2 points on that vertical axis which are on the sphere, they will not move. They will remain invariant. They will remain fixed. So that's a general question. For every symmetry, you can think about which points are left invariant by that symmetry. And to some extent, this is a very general remark. Whenever there is a group of symmetries which is moving points on the space, these two questions determine the whole thing. that you should know which points can be reached to by symmetry with from some given other point, and which points don't change under the given symmetry. Yeah, so mathematically this is called set of orbits of the action, and these are called what are called stabilizers of the action. Stabilized because the points are not going to move. So once you answer this question, they will tell you what are the stabilizers. And then there are many important concepts in mathematics which are built around the relation between orbits and stabilizers. Since I don't have much time to go into detail on each example, I'll not be able to give an example what exactly here is happening, what is stabilizer and what are orbits. But yeah, so excuse me for that. Maybe in the question and answer, I can talk a little bit about it. Okay, so to save time, let me go a little ahead and talk about now functions and symmetries of functions, and then maybe talk a little bit about spectral decomposition and how is it related. So the idea behind symmetries is this. So I have drawn a picture which I cheated since my drawing is not good. I just drew this part and copy pasted perfectly so that it nicely got assembled. But the point is I wanted to draw a periodic wave. So what is periodicity? This is what I just told you. You just think of this part, and if the next part is a copy paste of that, and the next part is the copy paste of that, then such a function is called a periodic function. And for some reasons which we'll not go into right now, there is a relation between taking two pi periodic functions. They are good for certain reason, and we'll see why. Maybe we won't, but there is a reason. So you look at the two pi periodic functions. Examples, let me just write down three examples. One is sine x, the other is cos x, and the third function, which is a combination of these two involving complex numbers. So something called e power ix, which is sine x plus I times cos x. Generally, it's written in other way. So sorry, so I made the goof up here. Sorry for that. It should be other way around. The real part will be cos x. Okay. So this is a real valued function. This is another real valued function. If I combine them using this complex number I, then I'll get a complex valued function, which will be also periodic. And these are very nicely related to each other. You can write down e power ix in this fashion. You can write down sine x in terms of e power ix and e power minus ix. And similarly, cos x in terms of e power ix and e power minus ix. So there's an interplay between real and complex functions, which helps many times. But never mind. So these are the examples of what are called periodic functions. And the idea is this. So in general, what is periodicity? Periodicity is also some sort of symmetry. So I'll draw another picture and explain what sort of symmetry you are looking at. So you look at the real line. Just don't think of this. Just think of this as some plane, not plane, but plain structure without anything, any geometry or anything. Okay, in the beginning, just think of this as a usual line. Now there is a way to talk about a point x here, and you can add 2 pi to that point to get another point here. And as I said in a couple of minutes back, your function should take same values at x and x plus 2 pi for every x in R. Then the function is called periodic. Which also means that, let me modify my figure a little bit. So x is here, x plus 2 pi will be here. Suppose I have gone long way, and for every positive integer or negative integer, I'll get x plus n into 2 into pi, this kind of point. So this will be somewhere on this side if n is positive, this side if n is negative. In that sense, I have just drawn it very generically. So for all those points, the value of f is same. And now relate this with the clock. In clock, you are allowed to go on rotating the clock, and if you rotate it by 360 degrees, you come back to the original point. This is exactly what is happening on the line. 360 degrees is same as the angle 2 pi. That's why 2 pi plays an important role. So if you go from x, come to x plus 2 pi, the function will again take same values and it will keep on repeating. So in that sense, there is a symmetry. So one can write down what is the space, what is the group, what is the action, and all that. But all that will just give you that if you translate anything by an integer multiple of 2 pi, then the value doesn't change. So what is happening is that you think of the integers as your, let's say, motions or symmetries, and then you translate by n into 2 pi to move to a point. And what, so that's a symmetry. And what's happening is that the invariance part is given by this condition that f doesn't change the value even if you apply that symmetry. So such functions are called periodic functions, and why they are important. So I'll just write down one equation and not and move to something else because again here the technical part is difficult to describe in short time. What you can do is you can write down any function in some sense equal to its Fourier expansion. So any periodic function, let me say f is periodic. I'll not go into what is this double quote equality and so on. Those are technical grounds. But the crux of the matter is that you can write a function as a combination of these e power inx functions, which I talked about some time back, which we know they are periodic, and f is also periodic. And these are called Fourier coefficients of f, and this is called a Fourier expansion of f. I wanted to talk about the relation of this with Laplace eigenfunctions and characters, but I believe I'm running out of time soon. So, and I wanted to talk about some more important aspects. So let me leave it here at this moment. I'll take a 1 minute pause before I move to the next topic. So are there some questions? You can please type in the chat window here. We'll take them in the end. Okay. So let me talk about an important development in mathematics, which has been happening in the last 150 years almost. So it was originated by a mathematician called Felix Klein. Some of you might have heard the topological object called Klein's bottle. So the same Klein. His idea was to study various geometries in the following way. So I'll talk about what do you mean by geometries, because many people might know only one geometry, which is the school geometry that one learns. But mathematically, there are other geometries. I'll talk about that in a minute. The idea was that what are the symmetries and what are the invariants pertaining to a certain geometry. And then the idea of Felix Klein, which went by the name Erlangen program, was that you can characterize geometries by which groups or which symmetries. So I told you about this way to talk about set of symmetries satisfying the certain invariance condition. They are called symmetric groups. So what are the symmetric groups and their invariants associated to a given geometry? And then can you study geometry in that fashion instead of studying each geometry in a different way? So of course, there are a lot of things to talk about this particular theme, but let's just see very briefly what were the various things which were unified and which got unified under this. One is the usual Euclidean geometry. So the technical word is Riemannian geometry in the sense that there is a notion of length, angles, everything on, let's say, plane R2, and then you can study it, and you can show that if you want to preserve the distances and angles in this geometry plus orientation, which I've forgotten to add, important point. If you do that, then there is a certain group called all special orthogonal matrices of order n cross n. So that group is the group of symmetries for this particular geometry, which preserves distances, angles, and orientation. Let me just write it here. So orientation will mean that there is a certain order of axes, x1, x2, xn. If you flip x1 and x2 axes with each other, you get a different orientation. If you again flip x2 and x3, then you will get back the original orientation and so on. So there's a way to mathematically define it, which will not go into that right now. So here also orientation. The other geometry is something called hyperbolic geometry, which later on became the geometric model for studying relativity theory. So in general, this is called hyperbolic geometry, where you don't study the usual R2 or Rn, but study something called hyperbolic plane of uh, or hyperbolic space of dimension n. And there is a different group here which goes by the name SO1n. So I'll just say one word which that may not make sense to many of you. So this is a mixed definite form. So it's like not a positive definite inner product. It's going to have a signature of 1 and n, where n is the dimension that you started with. So this is the different kind of geometry which has negative curvature, for example. And as I said, it plays a role in the study of space-time geometry where you take n equal to 3. And the group is different. This is not the same. These two groups are not same, but the properties are same. It again preserves the distance and angles in the hyperbolic set. And the third one is much more abstract, where you don't even talk about real numbers. You just abstractly talk about lines and points, where you start with some idea that there are no parallel lines. Any two lines either they coincide or they intersect in exactly one point. This sort of geometry is called very abstractly defined. It's called projective geometry, which was so people had begun to study such geometries in 19th century itself, and then under all this program, all the geometries get unified in the sense that the theme is that you have a group of symmetries, the invariants, and then that defines and characterizes the geometry. So this was the theme behind this Erlangen program, started by Klein, and many people, many geometers contributed to it, and it gave a good structure to the subject of geometry, in the sense that all these different looking examples get unified. Okay. The next theme I'm going to talk about is something related to what really Arun talked about. So I didn't attend Arun's talk in this series. He probably talked about symmetry breaking. So I'm just going to talk about the mathematical meaning of this word, the context of symmetry breaking, without going into its interpretation in quantum mechanics or physics. So that's not my subject. So I'll not go into those details. I'll just talk about very briefly what is the idea. Since I'm kind of short of time, I'll not go into the slides as such. I'll just tell you the theme. The theme is that you start with a symmetric group of a space X, whose every symmetry can be now thought of as a matrix or a linear map on a vector space. That's the idea of what is a representation theory in one line. Every group element, every symmetry is thought of as a linear map in some compatible way. We can write equations and so on. And then there is an important idea that, so you now think of what is happening. The whole group, whole set of symmetries can be thought of as symmetries of a vector space now instead of the original geometric space. And then we'll have an important assumption that smaller subsets of this V are not going to stay stable. What is stable? Stable means, for example, you think of a line inside a three-dimensional space. Whatever symmetry you apply, that line stays, any point on that line stays within that line itself. Such a thing is called stability. And then we are assuming that uh, the given vector space with this given representation has this property that there is no smaller subspace which is stable other than zero in that space. Such a thing is called an irreducible subspace. And the idea of symmetry breaking is this. You have some way to talk about G, the elements of the set G, which is a group acting by symmetries on a vector space. And then you want to reduce the action by or reduce the symmetries to a smaller set, which is also a group. So now, unless you know what is a group, it will be difficult to visualize what's happening. But just think of that. You are reducing your set of symmetries, and that's why the word symmetry breaking. And then you can visualize this. So if you understood the idea of what is happening here, V is a set, a vector space on which there is some transformations happening. And now you are allowed to have a smaller set of transformations. For example, if you are allowed rotations and reflections at the beginning, symmetry breaking will mean that you are only allowed to apply rotations and no reflections are allowed. So such kind of thing. And now the question is that, so you started with V, which has no the property that it cannot be broken further into stable subspaces. So think of this as an atom or a prime number which cannot be broken into smaller parts. And now if you are allowed to have only a smaller set of symmetries, what is the story? Does the does is there a decomposition of V into even smaller subspace which are stable only under this smaller set of symmetries? And this is the question which has different name in different subjects. So mathematicians will typically call such a question as a branching problem, because you are thinking of some object which is not does not have any smaller parts. But if you reduce your symmetric group, then this object will break up into smaller parts. Okay, and that's the phenomenon. So I have to make a choice. So let me not go into the details of the next example, except I'll just tell you one instance of this symmetry breaking, which I have drawn here as a set of facts. Okay, so I'll just tell you what happens. There is a certain odd dimensional space 2n plus 1 on which this orthogonal group in three coordinates SO3, that's going to act as a representation. There is going to be a symmetry of this group on this vector space, which is a certain 2n plus 1 dimensional space. And if you only allow the SO2 element, so this I can in fact draw. Yeah, there's a space here. I only look at this kind of special orthogonal matrices which look like this: 1 0 0 0 cos theta sin theta. Can put minus sign here for convenience. Like this. So I look at such matrices. So now this part is orthogonal group of order 2. So you just think of theta is any real number and you allow these kind of matrices only, not all 3 by 3 special orthogonal matrices. Sorry. So this is the symmetry breaking. So if you're only allowed to look at such matrices, then what's going to happen is that this V2n plus 1 is going to break into 2n plus 1 one-dimensional copies. So there'll be, so everything is happening over complex numbers. So for every, so you think of complex numbers, complex numbers, complex numbers 2n plus many times. Each copy of complex numbers is like a one-dimensional vector space over complex numbers. And then on that, this SO2 is going to keep it stable. And just to relate that with something that some of you might know, so there is a notion of integer spin versus half integer spin in particle physics. So these representations that we started with, they correspond to something called full integer spin, where you look at this 2n plus 1 pieces and they will be parameterized by these numbers: minus n, 1 plus 1 minus n up to 0, then 1 2 up to n minus 1 and n. And then there is something called half integer particles or half integer spin representations. One has to go to a different group other than O3 or SO3, called special unitary group SU2. And then this group plays an important role in quantum mechanics in the context of symmetry breaking. So this is almost like SO3, except it has more, let's say, so here you only consider full integer spin representations, and the remaining half integer spin representations will be even dimensional, and they will come when you look at the group SU2. So this is the effect. So I can of course go into all the calculation details, but since we don't have enough time, I decided not to go into that. Another thing which I unfortunately have to skip is discussion about how the branching problems goes into spectral theory of manifolds, which is one of the research areas where I have contributed a little bit as a part of my work. I would definitely like to talk more about this, but we don't have much time. So if there are some questions, I can maybe say something there. So I'll straight away skip to the penultimate slide where I'll mention two of the important contemporary research schemes where, where this thing, the idea of symmetry breaking, and not only that, but also in general, the notion of symmetry of geometric objects is there. So one goes by the name geometric invariant theory. So the idea is that, so very briefly, so I'll say some words. Some of you know a few things about this in more detail, so you can of course go and read more. What you can do is that you can construct geometric spaces where every point of the space itself is a geometric space. Okay, so the first such example is something called projective space, where you can think of, so you like take a vector space, or let's say take R3, and think of a space whose every point is giving you a line passing through, let's say 0, 0, 0 in R. So the set of lines which pass through 0, 0, 0 with some extra geometric structure. That is an example of something called modular space. And often these modular spaces are constructed using techniques in algebraic geometry and algebraic group. So that's the place where this notion of, so the theme is same. You have some geometry, you have some groups acting on them by symmetries, and then which is specified by what remains invariant. So this started by a famous mathematician D. Mumford, the algebrogeometric part of this, and then that led to construction and theory of modular spaces. There are many more interesting such objects. So yeah, so I'll not go into that part in detail now. And the other one is something called Langlands program, which is another big project, if you call it a project. So this is like, so mathematicians say that this is one of the analogs of the grand unification theory, that there are various, let's say, areas and themes in mathematics. I'll just say some names here. One is the representation theory of algebraic groups, which I alluded to very briefly. The other part, which I didn't talk about at all, is the arithmetic theory of L functions, which are certain complex valued functions which encode arithmetic data and which have nice analytic properties. And the third is the example like sphere, which I briefly talked about, where, and something about the manifold, which I didn't get time to talk much. Maybe in the question answer, I'll come to that. So there are three different kind of objects. One is the representation theory purely algebraically, other is the arithmetic theory of L functions, and third one is the actual geometry of various spaces coming from uh, these groups. And by geometry, I don't always mean the Riemannian or differential geometry. It could be like purely algebraic geometry where there is no notion of real numbers or distances and so on. There is something called p-adic geometry as well, where it's a mix of these two. So all these things there. So the Langlands program is a certain, let's say, theory of and a wave of conjectures, as it is always talked about, which relate these objects to each other in a nice manner. Yeah. So in very broad sense, it is also related to the symmetry and invariance. So this was what I wanted to say. So thank you all. We'll take some questions now, and I'll be happy to go back to some of the topics and discuss in more detail. So I'll keep sharing the screen so that we can go back to it.
Thank you so much, sir, for this insightful talk, and thank you for correcting me about Lie groups. Yeah. So
Good.
is this right? Like now it's Lie group, na? Yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't talk about Lie group, so excuse me for that. So, but the examples which I talked about, like it's a orthogonal group, then there was this SO n comma one, which is called like a mixed signature orthogonal group, and the unitary group. All these are examples of something called Lie groups.
Okay.
Now, hopefully, all of you will at least remember the pronunciation correctly.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So we'll be happy to take any questions if there are. You can unmute yourself and put it in the chat box if you like.
I know this is kind of like a question that is probably not, I don't know, like answerable in a short duration. But like, sir, could you like kind of give a semi-layman explanation of like how you find irreducible representations of a group, like a Lie group?
Yeah, so one aspect I can certainly talk about. So I'll just go to a blank slide and explain very briefly. So I'll again draw the same picture which I used for sphere. The iPad gives, let me correct the shape of the sphere very nicely. Sorry, this is not the one. Anyway, so let me draw the equator just to indicate that this is sphere. So I told you that rotation group SO3 is something which gives you symmetries of this. So there is one way to, let's say, construct representations out of this is that what you look at is, so this is what I was going to talk in terms of the manifold thing. So let me go to the next slide. So what you do is that I'll be very brief here, not going to the technical details. So you look at certain kind of functions on this sphere. Let me call it S2. And then let me call this as G. So G will act on, so whatever this means, transform, let's say, these functions. And then this gives rise to the following nice thing that if you, so this happens particularly nicely in this, in the case of sphere, that this function space, I'm very brief here, I'm not explaining what sort of functions you look. So this will itself look like some, so what I told sometime back. So this is like V1 plus V3 plus V5. So I said that for the group SO3, the representations, the irreducible representations are known to be of dimension and to be of odd dimension. And for every odd number, there is one irreducible representation. So in fact, one can write down these functions. They are called, I think, certain kind of, they are called harmonic functions, harmonic polynomials on the sphere. And then the idea is that in this case, they will break down nicely into these parts where V1 will be a certain one-dimensional space of, in this context, there will be constant functions. V3 are going to be again some sort of harmonic polynomials of some homogeneous degree, which will give a copy of V3, which is going to be three-dimensional, and so on. So this is an example where you start with the space on which there is a symmetric group, and then if you look at functions on that space, then that function space itself will decompose into representations of this group. And I just now realized that I should have said that in the talk itself. You don't have to go to S2. The simpler part is just circle. So if you do the whole thing on circle, you will just get the, so you'll just get the usual Fourier theory, which is nothing but the representation theory of the circle group itself. But probably that's not so geometric. That's why this picture might be helpful. Yeah. In general, there is no way to, like, there is no one way to construct irreducible representations of a group. So if the group is nice, which is like a compact Lie group, then there is a theory called Borel-Weisbot theory, where you look at something called line bundles on symmetric spaces, and from that you can construct the representations. So that's a partial answer to your question.
Thank you, sir.
Have
Like,
you asked this question? Is it okay? It's true. Okay.
yeah, like actually, like you're talking about complex stuff. Like, I was mainly, I'm mainly concerned about the representations of the Lorentz group, which is non-compact as far
Yes,
as
yes.
my layman
Exactly.
knows.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So there are similar ideas work, except you have to work with different spaces. So so this I didn't allude too much. There is something called hyperbolic space, which I've briefly talked about. And what you can do is that a certain space of functions on the hyperbolic space that will often be model for representations of these Lorentz groups. But in general, this theory is much more complicated because Lorentz group, as some of you might know, is not a compact group. And one of the great Indian origin mathematician, Harish Chandra, was the person who kind of built this theory of non-compact Lie groups and the representation theory of, and structure theory of such groups. So in some cases, there is a way to see these representations more, let's say, concretely by looking at function spaces, but in general, not. Whereas for compact groups, things are a little more easy.
Oh, I see that. Also, it's good to know a historical fact like what Professor Harish
Yeah,
Chandra has done. So, thank you, Professor.
yeah. So any more questions?
Thank you very much again, sir, for this
Yeah.
insightful talk. Yep, it gives us some idea regarding the mathematics and reasoning behind the patterns and symmetries of the nature. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Okay, so see you all. Bye.